If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button as well as the bell to be notified of future videos. Thank you.
Hello Internet, we are back and we have an interesting fellow here with us, Captain Jacques du Toit, or Jacques du Toit as my wife will call him. He's talking to us today about a career change he had in the Air Force, South African Air Force. He went from SIGINT to Imagery, which I'm sure I can't even say that word properly, but he will explain it to us. And then he's also going to talk about the space program, which South Africa had. I wasn't even aware of that either. He's a fascinating man. I've really enjoyed our previous conversations. He's in New Zealand. It's nighttime there. I'm in Swineland, Switzerland. It's morning here. And this is a wonderful thing about technology. Jacques, welcome. Thanks, my friend. I'm really glad you're back. Over to you.
Thank you, Chris, and greetings here from Wellington in New Zealand. It's now 20 minutes past 8. The sun just set. I'm looking out here towards Australia, and I can see a bit of the Tasman Sea. That's the sea between Australia and New Zealand out my window here. And on the side, I've got a lovely Manuka tree forest. Manuka is the tree they make the famous New Zealand honey from. So can't believe this is already the 4th episode, and I've got a lot of things to share with you tonight. Hope you find this also fascinating. So in my career, in this episode, I'm going to cover the last 3 or 4 years of my career before I left the Air Force in the beginning of 1999. So at this stage, in 1994, I was still with the Signal Intelligence team, based, co-located with the Joint Air Reconnaissance Center, or JARIC, at Air Force Base Waterkloof. And at that time, JARIC was also going through a lot of changes. And the two individuals, the officer commanding of JARIC at that stage was Colonel Yanni Malan. He started talking to me about a career change and a role change to come over to Imagery Intelligence. And his argument was that, I've spent a lot of time with Signal Intelligence, and I've got a lot of experience there, but in the future for my career, it's great to diversify your experience. So by the time, as my career progresses, it's going to be a good thing to have multiple areas of expertise, for future promotions and future roles within the Air Force. So I started to think about this, and it made a lot of sense. But I actually joined the Air Force to be in electronic warfare and to do signal intelligence, and so I had to think about this a bit. And I knew that he was right. And at that stage, I said, okay. So what would be my role? He's got some plans for me, but I must just be with him. I said, great. And I got an internal transfer from the Signal Intelligence team. There were now a lot of new officers that have been trained up in that area, and it felt like a good point in time for me to now move on to something else. And a handful of us were put into a new research and development team around digital imagery. And that's how I started my career with the imagery intelligence side of JARIC. Now, JARIC was established in 1967 at Air Force Base Swartkops, and it really did a lot of all the hard lifting around imagery intelligence during the border war. So whenever one of our reconnaissance assets flew, it's all a wet film based. So your Impala, your Canberra, your Buccaneer, or your Mirage would land. They developed a film, and then that film would be sent immediately to somebody either deployed or at JARIC at Swartkops for 3 levels of reporting. So the first one was an initial report, which was time critical. So you had to, within 1 hour, get a report out on what did you see on that negative, and you would do the imagery interpretation from the negative. There wasn't time to print images usually. The second one is now a bit more time. So you now have a couple of hours to a couple of days to now write a proper detailed analysis of what did you see on that film, what was covered. And usually wet film, you would ideally have stereo sets of images. So there's usually about a 40 to 60% overlap depending on your camera, where you can now with a stereoscope look at both, and you would see a 3D picture in your mind of the terrain and everything else. So you could do that detailed analysis. And the third type of report would be now a bit more strategic, where you've got a lot of time, months to look at an area, and the wide area, something that may be of strategic intelligence value that wasn't covered in the first two reports. But for the most, it was really the tactical situation, get the film developed, do the interpretation. And there were a lot of people trained at that stage to do that imagery intelligence, that interpretation of what they actually see. And they were referred to as PIs, or photographic interpreters. But what has happened also is that in the late 80s or early 70s to late 80s, politically, a lot of things, a lot of big strategic programs were being established as part of the political setup in South Africa at that time. And it was one of the initiatives was obviously the South African space program. And I'll talk a bit more about that a bit later and cover that in a bit more detail. But the thinking was, if we're going to have a constellation of satellites, we would need to invest in parallel to upgrade JARIC's capability to be able to meet that new world of digital imagery that was coming available at that time, or that was foreseen to be available around about the mid-90s. So there was a big project initiated to invest in the upgrade of JARIC at that time. Now, my first step was to do the imagery orientation course. So it was a really basic course at JARIC where you were taught map reading and how to work with photographs, and you know, how to build a map from photographs, and we call it a photo mosaic. So I did that course. I think that was the 4th time in my career I've done a map reading course, and it was not the last. So also that time in my career, the one night, a few of us were in the offices pub at Air Force Base Waterkloof, as you usually end up when you stay there. And one of my friends there said, did you guys hear about this new course at UNISA that the Air Force is sponsoring, where you can actually go and do a degree within 3 years in a specific line at UNISA? That is, it's called a military certificate, but it's a degree equivalent. And I thought about it, and I said, somehow, you know, all of us missed that communication. So I went to investigate it, and a couple of days later, you know, submitted my application to study at UNISA for this. And I then started my certificate in military management studies in parallel to all of this, because I always wanted to study and have some form of a degree. When I was still busy with the signal intelligence work, I lobbied the career development people to sponsor and come up with a degree for the EW, the electronic warfare teams. So every year they would send someone to go and study electronic engineering of that, and that got approved in that last year I was with them. And the timing was just a bit off, because I was just about to start that course, or sign up for the electronic engineering course, when I got selected for officers course. So I had to choose between the two, and then one of my other colleagues, I think Francois van Teylingen, he was a lieutenant by that stage, he went and did the first electronic engineering course. So now my opportunity came up with UNISA. It seemed like a more practical way to start studying, and I think that was very necessary, and it's probably, with hindsight, one of the best decisions I've made to actually sign up for that course and do it. Now, what UNISA did is they had 3 academic years in 2 physical years. So they just strip all the holidays out in the middle. So you do 8 months, 8 months, 8 months. They give you the 24 months of the degree. And it was quite hard going, a lot of assignments, and but it was really good. It was now a good exposure for me in the management sciences, which would serve me very well for the last few years of my career, but also after I left the Air Force. It was a really good program that UNISA had with the Defence Force at that time. So Yeah, in the end of the middle of 1995, Colonel Yanni Malan called me to his office one day, and you know, he was quite a legend, quite an interesting character. Very short guy, very soft-spoken, but extremely bright and intelligent. And he was one of those unique people who were just a great strategic thinker. And he would always be 2 or 3 steps ahead of the rest of us. And I remember in his office, officer commanding office at Jarek, they had these pin boards on the wall, but with curtains drawn. So in case you had like secret or classified imagery on it, you could draw the curtains, and then when you know, when you needed, you could open it and show people these images behind the curtains. So I remember this day I went into his office, and he had the curtains open, and on the board was not an image, but a piece of paper with a Polish proverb on the paper, and it said, "Where there's no wind, row." Polish proverb. And he was one of those people who believed in you should not wait for permission or ask for permission to do things, just do it. And that's how he got a lot of things done. And this was a piece of wisdom that he shared with us often, is, you know, just do it. Just where there's no wind, row. So I never forget that from him. And, you know, that was a valuable piece of advice that anyone can use. But he sat me down in his office and he said to me, he's done some thinking about something, and he wants to nominate me to go to the United Kingdom to go do the UK International Imagery Interpretation course. And, you know, obviously this was a great honor to be selected for this, but I immediately realized that, you know, I couldn't figure out why he wanted me to go on this course, because there were so many other much more better qualified people, and people who's been in photographic interpretation for almost a decade, you know, that were much better candidates, that were more deserving of me as the new guy on the block, to just walk in there, have almost no experience, and then go on this course. And he explained to me, he said that Jarek has got a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to go through a transformation and update its processes and its core business and its systems and its training system and everything else that goes with that. And he doesn't want that process to be tainted with the way things have always been done over the last 27, 30 years, because that was the last time such an investment was made in Jarek. So I was very honored for this, but I did raise with him the issue that I think some of my colleagues, my new colleagues, would be a bit unhappy with this junior guy being selected for this course. He said, you know, leave that to him. He'll make sure that they understand why and why he's sending me. So I think there were a few unhappy people about it, but I think with time they realized why he did it, and they respected his choice at the time. Although it would have been great and for any of them to go overseas for the 3-4 months of the course, that would have been awesome. They I think later on saw the wisdom of his thought process to send me as someone who's totally untainted with the old ways that Jarek operated. So yeah, finally went and got my passport, and I was off to the UK. South African Airways, landed in Heathrow, and it took me about 5 minutes just to sit down and figure out where I was and get a tube map. It's the first time ever I've been out of South Africa. And I got onto the tube, and I knew I had to get to this place called King's Cross Station. Now, as you know, that's the station Harry Potter, where that 9 3/4 platform is, you know, where they run through the brick wall. That's King's Cross. So I had to get myself with my big bag over to King's Cross. And I arrived there, and I got a ticket for the Northern Line. And I had to go on the Northern train line out of London to a place called Huntingdon, a small town about 100 kilometers up the railway line. And from there, I needed to get a taxi to RAF Whitton, the Air Force base where this course was being presented. So on the way there, as I got off the train at Huntingdon, there was this short Singaporean guy standing there, looking a bit lost and so on. So I said, hey, are you going to the Air Force Base? And he looked at me and said, yes. And I figured out he must be on the same course as me. And he turned out to be a flight sergeant from the Singaporean Air Force, a guy by the name of Michael Gann. He was on the Air Defense HQ in Singapore. And I did a course with him, and I'll show you a picture of all the people there a bit later. So arrived at Whitton, and the course was being presented at Whitton at a unit within the base called JSPI, or the Joint School for Photographic Interpretation. Now, Whitton, RAF Whitton, and I've got an image there of the gate guard. There's a Canberra aircraft to the gate. In 1993, so this is 2 years before I arrived there, the base officially said goodbye to its last operational squadron, and that was number 39 Canberra Squadron, and these Canberras were airborne jammers. And before that, in the 80s, Whitton was one of the big old V-bomber bases. They had Vulcans on Whitton. And towards the west of the base were these huge, like football field size parking pans. And those had to, were the parking areas where they parked the Vulcan bombers, the V-bombers. But now the bombers were gone, and these parking areas were now the parking area for the vehicles, because Whitton was now becoming the headquarters for logistics command for the Royal Air Force, for the entire Royal Air Force. So it was slowly becoming a logistics base, and there were still some units like JSPI in the middle of this base left at the time we did the course. The first day of the course, we all arrived there on a Sunday, more or less, and we get to introduce ourselves, and we meet the officer commanding and some of the staff of the school itself. And I'll put up an image that I'll share with you, quiz on the students that were there. I'll quickly talk you through it just to get a bit of a sense on who was on this course. So in this image from the back, the first guy there was a Lieutenant Widodo from Indonesia. He flew maritime aircraft in Indonesia. That's myself. Next to me, tall Belgian guy is Ben. He is a sergeant with one of the F-16 squadrons in Belgium. Next to me is what became one of my good friends, is a Brazilian fighter pilot, Salu Atostianos. And Salu and myself stayed very close to each other in the officers' mess there at Whitton. And I'll tell you some stories about Salu a bit later also. And next to him, another Belgian Army sergeant. The Belgian Army has got a artillery spotting RPV, or remotely piloted vehicle system, and Emil was from that RPV squadron. And next to him is Michael Gann from Singapore. In front of Michael there is the Bahraini captain by the name of Salah Hamed Khalifa, interesting character. And right on the other side, on the left-hand side in the front, is Mohammed Latif. He is also a captain with the Malaysian Air Force, also flew maritime aircraft. And right in the center front is Commander Johnston. He was the officer commanding of JSPI. And to his right in the Army uniform was one of our lecturers, a Major Thierry Foley. He was an ex-tank commander, and also a fascinating man. He could speak 5 languages, and he told us the most amazing stories about his career. The person in civilian uniform is one of the other lecturers we had. JSPI contracted a lot of old or previous experts in imagery intelligence and imagery interpretation to come and lecture on the course, both the UK course and the international course. And this was one of the lecturers that we had on the course itself. Now, so imagery intelligence is really the skill to look at imagery. It doesn't matter if it's photographic or video or satellite imagery or whatever, and to be able to interpret and add value to it what are you looking at? What are you seeing there? So initially we covered all the basics like sensors and map reading. So I had map reading for the 5th time in my career there at Witten. You know, a lot of the basic fundamentals like mensuration or measurement. How do you measure on a map and on a photograph? How do you work out photograph scale? All the basics that you needed to be an interpreter were covered off first. But then you go into a whole list of specific technical areas that you have to be expert in if you wanted to become a professional interpreter. Now, what they would do is you would have a theory presentation on the topic, and I'll go through some of the areas now. And then you would have a photo study of that area. And then you would actually go and have a visit to the physical thing or topic that is under discussion. And then you'll have some more photo studies after that. And end of that week, you'll do an exam on that subject. And we did 2 or 3 subjects a week. So it was quite a full program. But some of the topics that we did cover was, for instance, aircraft recognition. One of the with the Cold War, one of the significant activities of the NATO forces there, they were much more likely to run into new equipment, especially Soviet bloc equipment. And if they see that, they had to use a consistent language in describing what they're seeing and the features of this thing, whether it's a new fighter aircraft or a bomber or a missile system or a tank. You needed to have a consistent language so you communicate, the whole intelligence community, you know, understand the same thing when you explain it. So we were, you know, did a lot of slides on, you know, on the slide projector, aircraft recognition, to be able to know all the most common Soviet bloc and other aircraft. So we also did visits to Duxford, which is the Imperial War Museum's museum outside Cambridge. And then there they have a lot of aircraft, hangars and hangars full of aircraft, old and new, even MiGs. They've got the American display there with the U-2 and the SR-71 and a B-52 and F-15s, you name it, it's there. And I've got some images of that as well. But they also have the Ground Forces Museum, where a lot of the tanks and ground equipment and guns were displayed there. And something I remember there is that in the Ground Forces Museum, they had General Montgomery's campaign caravan. The regional caravan was renovated and was there inside this building. They also had some of the equipment they captured from the Iraqi war. So they had Soviet 2X6, which is similar to the South African G6, on display there. T-72 tanks, so all the stuff that was now 5 years old from the 4 or 5 years old from the Iraqi war, and also things like the SAM-2 missile systems. They had also had a few SAM missiles there, which was fascinating. But the idea was that now you can actually touch and see the things that we just had lectures and photo studies of in the classroom. We also went to RAF Alconbury. Now that's one of the American bases, and there they had the TR-2 or the U-2 spy plane, F-15s and A-10 Thunderbolts, the anti-tank aircraft. We went, so when we did airfields, for instance, we went to RAF Wittering. RAF Wittering is the home of the Harrier, the jump jet that can vertically takes off. So there's an image also of me sitting in a cockpit of a Harrier, first and only time in my life. You know, it was amazing seeing these aircraft up front, and you would have known that in the Falklands War, the Harriers actually shot down a lot of the Argentinian planes. So it was a fascinating visit also to Wittering. Wittering was also there for airfields. So you would study airfields. They would study them on imagery, then actually go to an airfield where they would drive you around and show you every single thing that you had to know on an airfield, from the navigational aids, the lines on the runway, every single thing in the language that was used. So it's actually very real. So no expense or time was spared to make sure that we got the benefit of the academic and the practical knowledge of what we are looking at. And it helps so much. You can see your level of understanding and interpretation just improve every time you've been on a visit like that, because you can now see okay, there's the fire brigade building, and there's the security and the fences, and so you can explain those things because you've actually seen it and experienced it firsthand. We also went to RAF Marham, where the tornadoes were. So they had these hardened concrete revetments, 2 tornadoes next to each other in a revetment. And that was also the link to the tactical reconnaissance. We also visited the tactical reconnaissance unit there. And it was fascinating to see that to save time, the photographic pod have 4 films in it. So if the plane lands, each film, the casing for that is color-coded. Okay, so you've got like a red, green, blue, and a yellow. And when they take it out, they put a Harley-Davidson Scrambler, a motorcycle, with a box at the back with the same colors. So you put the same colors into the same box on the back of the motorcycle. It goes across to the development guys. Their machines is also the same colors. They develop them in the same color-coded machines. And then it goes onto the photographic interpreter's light table with the same color coding. So by the time the red film comes over, they know that is the forward oblique camera, you know. There's no figuring out and losing time which is which. So that's how they've integrated that. And that experience with their tactical containers would serve me well later when we actually developed the containers for Jarek in South Africa as well, because we had a similar requirement for that. So we also, we went to so here's one of the most fascinating visits we had, was to the Lark Hill Royal School of Artillery. Now, Lark Hill, if you want to find that on Google Map, is very easy. You Google Stonehenge. So if you Stonehenge, if you find that on a map, exactly 2.5 kilometers north of that, that is where Lark Hill, with the Royal School of Artillery, is. In fact, Lark Hill is actually Stonehenge is on the grounds of Lark Hill, the Royal School of Artillery. And they were telling us when we arrived there is that back in the 70s and 80s, whenever the hippies had events, you know, there at Stonehenge, the army would quickly just declare an exercise, and they would close off all the roads so no hippies could get into Stonehenge. It was quite interesting. But Lark Hill is a place steeped in history. You walk into this front door of this maze, and on a big black table are little trophies and statues of silver. They got silverware there, the most amazing collection. And one of our hosts there told us that Lark Hill's silver collection is valued for insurance purposes over £1.5 million. Okay? And it's some of those articles are more than 200 years old, pieces of silver that was donated and especially commissioned for the Royal School of Artillery. So it's a very old place. And I remember also most of these army units, if they had a legacy unit serve in, let's say, a place like India, Thursday would be curry day in the mess. You will always get a curry in the mess in an army unit that served in India. That was just a tradition wherever you went. And also in the officers' mess where we stayed for the couple of days, on the walls were paintings of events that happened, especially during the Falklands War, where a lot of the people trained at Lark Hill on the blowpipe and rapier systems actually shot down some of the Argentinian planes with that. Those paintings were lining the wall all the way to your room. So it took me forever to get to my room because I was reading all the inscriptions and the history behind every painting. It was just one of those once-in-a-lifetime experiences to go to Lark Hill. Now, at Lark Hill, we slept there the first night, and the next morning they came and collected us in a bus now to take us up to show us some of the artillery equipment they have. And as we rounded this one corner, there's a lot of great gardens there around the school. Our host, one of the Royal School of Artillery instructors, he turned to me and he said, "Lieutenant, I understand that you are from South Africa." I said, "Yes." He says, "Look to your left, there may be an article of interest for you specifically as we come around the corner." And as we came around the corner, here's a G5, okay? A G5 cannon. And that G5 was captured during the Iraq War. This was one of Saddam Hussein's G5s. And he said that at a time when they captured it, they brought it over to the Royal School of Artillery, and they also had some ammunition there. They test fired, and they were mightily impressed by the G5 and what it could do. So it was quite a surprise. I didn't realize I'm going to see a South African G5 in the middle of, and it's also on the Salisbury Plain. So Larkhill is in the southern end of the Salisbury Plain, and north of that is the actual, like, their version of our Loatla, our battle school, where they actually do all their maneuvers and train on all their equipment. But they took us up to the storage area where they do all their training on the equipment. And there's a couple of images there, Quest, that I will quickly talk to. So the first one, there's AS90, which is the equivalent, a track version of the artillery piece, probably the equivalent of our G6. So the AS90, it only have a range of something like 26 or 28 kilometers. But its claim to fame is that it's got an auto-loader that can fire 4 shells in 1 minute. And that is needed for the British doctrine. They have an integrated system called Bates. It's like a militarized laptop that goes into each vehicle, each artillery piece, and it coordinates all the artillery assets that is in range of a specific target. And the battlefield commander then defines on a map a 1 by 1 square kilometer target area. And then the doctrine is, by pressing one button, the system called Bates, it's a battlefield artillery targeting engagement system, then coordinate all your assets onto that square kilometer and wipes it from the planet, in that attack. And that is the thing. You don't keep on shooting, over a long time. In 60 seconds, you put as much projectiles into that square kilometer and just delete it from the map. That was their doctrine, and that's why I had Bates to integrate it with. So that was the main artillery piece. Fascinating piece of equipment. Also, they have the Star Streak missile. So they showed us the Star Streak, and there's a image here of me tracking a couple of Gazelle helicopters flying towards the north with the Star Streak. It was an amazing missile. They also later took us to the Star Streak simulator, which is a dome simulator, probably about 30 meters in diameter. And they would project fast jets coming across the screen, or a helicopter hovering, or a jet coming straight at you. And then they each gave us opportunity to fire missiles now in the simulator with an actual shoulder-launched Star Streak. So I think I shot 3 missiles in that time we were there. It was great fun to now have this real simulator there, and you see all these guys just playing with all the missiles. It was great fun. But what is very interesting about the Royal School of Artillery is that they actually train everyone in the whole UK defense system that has got a responsibility to fire these missiles. So they train the special forces, even the Air Force Regiment, the guys who look after the security of the bases. They get trained on the Star Streak missile. And their training is heavily geared towards aircraft recognition. So you've got to pass an aircraft recognition test, because the Star Streak doesn't have a identification friend or foe function that can identify whether it's one of your planes or enemy plane. You've got to know from seeing it whether it's an enemy plane or not. So you've got to pass that part of the exam, and then you are not allowed to touch a real missile before you have shot 1,000 rounds in a simulator, and you've had a very high level of accurate hits in the simulator. Then you can actually go out and fire your first one for the first time. So they've learned those lessons from especially the Falcons as well. They had a great success with the blowpipe in the Falcons, but the training was first rate, and everyone who graduated from that course really knew how to use the Star Streak system. So also being a missile, I was very keen to learn more about it. Personal interest of mine is missiles. We also went to, later that afternoon, a few kilometers east of Larkhill is Ludgershaw, which is the vehicle reserve park for all the ground force equipment. They took us on a tour of that, and they showed us in the sheds these thousands and thousands of tanks and different armored personnel cars and equipment that they had there. They also took us to the Warrior. The Warrior is the version, the equivalent to our Ratel, but tracked. And it takes a crew of 3 plus 8 in the back. So they also put us in the back of some of these 2 at a time, and they drove us around the range there with the Warrior. Really impressive vehicle. Its claim to fame is that if they drive on this on any surface at 70 kilometers an hour, they can brake within the length of the vehicle. Now, to do that, the vehicle actually go and stand up like this and fall back on the track, and it stopped. And before, me and Salu, this fighter pilot from Brazil, we shared one of these Warriors. We were strapped in the back, and this instructor put his head down from the hatch, and he said, "Gentlemen, are you strapped in?" And the next minute, the driver just hit the brakes, and there went my camera flying to the front of the vehicle, and me and Salu looking at each other. It's like a 70-degree angle here, hovering in the air. But the Warrior also in the back had these 1.5 inch thick green, like a fiberglass panel on all the sides of the vehicle. And that was anti-ballistic panelings for in case any shrapnel came into the cabin, it would get stuck then, wouldn't bounce around and kill more people. So wherever it came in, it would get stuck, and it will like capture it so it doesn't bounce around, which I thought was quite an interesting feature of the vehicle itself. But also driving around one of the sheds, they pointed out to us there was a heap of wreckage lying next to a shed, all rusted and all buckled up. And this was the wreckage of a Warrior that was shot out by the Americans with an 810 Thunderbolt. 2 of them were patrolling, and they saw these 2 Warriors between the dunes, and unfortunately it was a blue on blue attack, and I think 15 guys died in the 2 Maverick missiles when they hit the 2 vehicles. But that was being the wreckage was being kept there almost as a reminder of the importance of making sure that you knew what your equipment looked like, and your identification was extremely good. There was no compromise from the Brits on that. So it was quite sobering to look at these vehicles. There's almost nothing left of them, and in modern warfare, that's just the reality. So that was also a fascinating visit. We also so part of tanks. There's another image there right next to JSPI's building. There's a Challenger tank, and there's a photo of Thierry Foley, the tank commander, the major, who was one of our lecturers on the course, giving a lecture there on tanks. And he had a lot of experience in the Middle East as a tank crew, especially in Israel and Beirut and places like that, with the UK forces there. And you could share firsthand a lot of the language and the description and how tanks work. But if you look at that image, you'll see that next to the barrel of the tank itself is a device with a lot of holes. It's smoke grenade launchers. They both sides of the barrel, usually like this. And one of the fascinating things that Thierry taught us is that in the 80s Western tanks, their smoke grenade launchers would be flared out like this. So it's the defensive equipment to shoot smoke out for yourself and the guys next to you, because they were defending against the attack from the Warsaw Pact. Where the Russian tanks, their grenade launchers, their smoke grenades were forward. So you shoot smoke yourself and you go for your own smoke and you go and attack. So doctrine actually determined the shape of those grenade launchers. And he said that here towards the middle 80s, they all of a sudden started getting images from these Warsaw Pact nations where the smoke generators have now changed to be defensive. And that's how they predicted almost 18 months to the date, the fall of the Soviet Union, that is going to come, because that doctrine had already changed and the tank design had already changed. So I found it fascinating that imagery interpreters picked it up long before anyone, they raced to say something is coming. There's a major doctrine change here in tanks that we must look out for. So that was fascinating seeing all of that. So also one of the subjects we had was harbors, and as part of that we went down to Portsmouth in the south of England. Portsmouth is where most of the Royal Navy vessels are kept. We stay there, the HMS Dolphin, which is the submarine school. We also went on the submarines. At the time, I think the Ark Royal was there. And also the latest Type 23 frigates have just been delivered in 95. And they were going to, in I think 96, going to go to Hong Kong for when Hong Kong was being given back to the Chinese, when they had 99-year lease in it. So these Type 23s were being prepared for that trip to actually go up to Hong Kong. We also one of the highlights was there in Portsmouth is the HMS Victory, the old wooden sailing ship, and there's also I've got an image of that, me standing by the ship there. And as luck would have it, that whole area was closed for the day, but the staff was still there. So we had a dedicated tour of the Victory, and we were told of the Battle of Trafalgar and how people lived in that ship. And it was, things I remember from that trip to the Victory is that the Victory's crew was 800 men on one sailing ship. It's just astounding to think you got all these people. There's 100 guns. What warfare would have been at that time. I think the Battle of Trafalgar was 1805. So it was fascinating having that experience also, just to see a bit of history there. But it just puts the Royal Navy in perspective. It's an old Navy that it's a area of history that you only appreciate when you see things like that on our trips there. So, but also in the harbors, harbors are of specific interest from a military and an intelligence context, because harbors is the capabilities there can tell you a lot of what can happen and what can be done and what type of operations can be serviced from a harbor. So there's all this technical language. What is the difference between a pier and a quay? And what is what does a dry dock look like, and a floating caissons? And there's all these technical terms around harbors. Now, on that trip, they actually put us on one of the harbor vessels and drove us around and showed us these things firsthand. So you could see, and all the cranes all have different names. So you got straddle cranes and derricks and so on. What's the difference? So you can actually now firsthand go and touch these things that we have been studying on imagery for the last week. So it was great to have that theoretical with the practical, every single subject we had. So we also studied things like electricity generation. So you can just imagine from a strategic point of view, the knowledge you need to have about your target areas and where they get the electricity from and how does it get generated. So we visited a couple of electricity manufacturers or producers there in England. We went to a combined cycle electricity plant. This is where they got two jet engines that get fed with natural gas, and so they draw two turbines, and the hot gas that comes from those two get combined into a third turbine, and the three together then generate power. And you've got a whole power plant the size of a rugby field delivering power to a city of almost 1 million people. So it was amazing. And the control of that, there's only 3 people. There's one guy at the guard at the gate and 2 guys in the control room. That's it. There's no other people in that electricity plant. That was quite fascinating to see, a first world electricity plant like that. But a fascinating area was also Penstock Dams. These are dams where water flowed down a pipe, goes through a generator, and then generates hydroelectricity. And in the Second World War, I think in Norway, they had the Peenemünde facility where Hitler was manufacturing heavy water or deuterium. Now, that was a Penstock Dam that they had to bomb to stop that production of the deuterium there. So we had a lot of also photographic studies of Penstock Dams and where the vulnerable points were and how you would attack them and so on. So we knew all the terminology around Penstock Dams. One of my personal favorites was nuclear power. So we studied the 9 different ways in which nuclear power can be generated. And we also had the photo study of the Chernobyl disaster. So they showed us the actual images from that disaster and told us the story, what actually happened there, and how you could see that on the imagery. So it was fascinating. We also later did nuclear weapons. And how would you, if you look at a base, how would you know there's nuclear weapons or biological or chemical weapons on a base and not on other bases? What are the telltale features to look out for a base? And that was also fascinating to learn all of that. And you can see, obviously, that was a huge topic in the NATO countries and the Warsaw Pact nations. So that was very relevant for them to be on top of that every time they looked at it. We also did quite a lot of work on rail networks. When a defense unit, mobilizes, that uses rail to get its tanks and heavy equipment to the front as soon as possible. So we studied things like gravity shunt works and all the terminology around the capability and capacity of railway lines, the gauge sizes, and all the equipment that goes with a rail yard. Also, a big topic was bridges. So we had to study all the different bridges from an engineering point of view. So you have got your cantilever bridges and your suspension bridges and all the different terminology. And also what we had to know is where are the vulnerable points. If you had to place explosives on those bridges or attack it with one smart bomb, where would you put it? So each one, we had to know exactly what, for that design, where's the vulnerable point on that bridge. And that was also covered in our photo studies. An interesting topic also in the Northern Hemisphere was something like cratology. That's the study of crates. Now, the Russians love their crates, and every time they shipped a missile system or a fighter aircraft, they would have a specific crate make for it. So by knowing what the crate is, by measuring the crate and its dimensions, you could tell what's in it. And if you remember back at the Cuban Missile Crisis, that's how they picked up on the ships that there were now fighter aircraft and missiles and ballistic missiles going to Cuba, because they looked at the crates itself. And only later it got verified when these things are actually made operational in Cuba, and that's part of the history. Some of the other visits we had was to a company called Vinton. They make reconnaissance pods for planes. So Vinton is out in the Midlands near Cambridge in a town called Bury St Edmunds. And Vinton, when we had that visit, as we were walking through the factory, they were now building these pods. Once again, one of these engineers said, Lieutenant du Toit, you might be interested in this pod over here. This is the first of your cheetah pods that we are building. So they were building the pods for the cheetah, the reconnaissance pods. And he said the Royal Air Force liked your spec so much, they are thinking of building a similar pod for some of their assets as well. So I didn't even know at that stage that we were having pods made by Vinton, but there it was, the first one right there in front of me. A big topic for study was also antennas. So I knew a lot about that from my electronic warfare and signal intelligence days. But the year it was more about missile systems and radars and communication arrays. One of the places we went through past twice is that there's a little town in the middle of the UK there called Rugby, where the game rugby actually got its name from. Now, Rugby at that time, right next to the motorway, had an old airfield, decommissioned airfield. And on this airfield, there were 16 800-foot masts. So these masts were each 200 meters tall. And that was the first time I've seen a very low frequency array antenna. So the actual mast is the antenna, 200 meters high. That's huge. And they had 16 of these in an array there. And a very low frequency masts like that get used for only one purpose, and that is communication with submarines. Okay. And it was amazing driving past this and seeing this, because the top half was in the clouds. You couldn't even see the top half of it. I think since then, technology have changed a bit, and they may have decommissioned that site in Rugby, but it was amazing just seeing this and understanding that what this is being used for. We also, so part of equipment, this was quite interesting. Whenever we covered, especially ground equipment, they would also cover what was called signature equipment. So one of the photographs they showed us was a piece of desert, okay, obviously in Iraq somewhere. And here next to the road was a little, the best thing that we can describe it with is a little VW bus, those old combis. There was a Russian UAZ 452. They used them for ambulances in Russia. They were being made for about 3 decades in Russia. And so one of these were parked next to the road by itself. Now you just think a little minibus like that, what is the significance of that? But that little minibus had a little box on the roof, the size of a shoebox. And you had to carefully look on imagery to see that little shoebox on the roof. Now that UAS 452, that little minibus, is the signature vehicle for the Scud missile system. And that little vehicle does the pre-work and the coordination of the piece of area on the ground where they're going to launch the Scud from. So it calculates the navigational point for the launch point for a Scud. So if you pick up that little minibus, you didn't have to see the Scud. You can predict that within 2 weeks, the Scud will be launching from there. And that's what the imagery interpreters in the UK were looking for these little minibuses with a little shoebox on the top. That shoebox was just basically a part of the equipment for inertial navigation system, because they didn't have GPS then. And that would give them a very accurate measurement. If you park there for a couple of hours, it will give you a very accurate grid reference on a map to launch the Scud from when you actually go and park it there later. So that became very important. So a lot of the Russian equipment had a second piece of equipment that no one knew about, which was the signature equipment. And knowing this list of signature equipment was a great help to a photographic interpreter, because then you can predict what was going to happen in the future in that area. We also studied petrol, oil, and lubricants. So the exploitation, transmission, and the refinery of oil, crude oil, into all its components. And for that, our visit was to a place called Shellhaven. Now, Shellhaven is on the Thames River in London. It's on the eastern side of London, and it's a 5 by 7 mile site where there's just oil tanks and storage and refinery equipment. And they make everything there, from high-end aviation fuel and gases right through to bitumen for roads, everything in between. So we had to study also the refining process to understand how do you refine crude oil into those products, and where does it happen in the site, and you track it through the pipes and the different vessels, and that was fascinating. So that visit, it took us about 6-7 hours to drive through that whole site. It's a huge site, and identify the things on photographs from other sites, and to be able to identify them, to be able to describe them, because you've seen it in real life. It's quite an amazing experience to see that. And also things like industry. So telling the difference between a steel factory and an aluminium factory. How do you know the difference? How do you know the difference between heavy industry and a biochemical factory for military purposes? How would you know the differences between the two? So they showed us actual examples in Europe and the Warsaw Pact, where we had these factories where to identify them from imagery and describe them. We also had a visit to the UK JARIC. Now, the UK also have a JARIC, and that's where the South African name came from. And that JARIC was at RAF Brampton. And Brampton is also the place where they maintain the target folders for the nuclear strike force of the UK. So, that was a fascinating visit also. And, I could see the parallels and how they operated and how we operated after all these years. After 28 years, different routes, it was very similar how places were laid out and how they worked. It was fascinating. But my most favorite subject on that course at Witten was a subject called PI techniques. And this was the integration subject. And we usually had those lectures on a Friday afternoon. And what they would do is they would get some of the more experienced lecturers to come in and have a special lecture on a specific topic. And we would look at images and he would talk us through, and that would develop your ability to think like an interpreter. So when you look at something, what are you actually looking at? And one of our favorite games that we used to play was, what is the day of the week? So they would show you pictures of let's say, a typical city. and you had to determine what day of the week that image was taken on. And that was fascinating, just to get you to think, how would you know that it's a weekend and not a weekday, or the other way around? And how would you know it's a Tuesday versus a Friday? Just to get your thinking, how would you go about that and start thinking with that analytical ability? There was also a set where there was a beach with sand, and there were tank tracks leading into the sea, but there were no tanks. So you had to try and think, now what happened here? And that specific one was about a landing craft coming to receive a tank, which had to back up and reverse back into the landing craft, and the landing craft left, and the picture was taken afterwards. So just from the shape of the tracks, you could tell it was leaving and not coming, and things like that. How would you do that? That analytical process was taught to us through exercise like that. Another interesting one was with the, sorry, just want to get some water. The East German Defense Forces, the DDR, had a very interesting telecommunication setup. Now, they would have, if one base had to talk to another base, they would put a dedicated phone line or data cable in between the two bases. And these phone lines would terminate in a little white box by the front gate of that base. So the HQ would have the most white boxes outside its front gate, because many units had to report into there. So what they used to do when they got the imagery for the East German bases, they would first go look at the front gate and count the white boxes. And the ratio of white boxes will tell you the importance of that base versus another base, which is just maybe a company level base or a smaller specialist unit. You that will typically have 3 or 4 white boxes, but HQ would have like 30 boxes. All these little white boxes standing out by the front gate. That was quite interesting. Also, things like using sports fields. So immediately, if you look at a sports field, you get scale, because one of the first things you want to do when you look at images, you want to scale things so you don't get things wrong. So a container doesn't look like a big hall, a shipping container. So you want to get your scale right. And a sport field is a great aid with that. You can immediately scale things once you've got a sports field, or a tennis court is something that you can look at. I remember in Angola, there was a ratio of baseball fields to soldiers. So you could easily see when they started building more baseball fields that a unit was being moved from one unit to another one, and there was an increase or a build up in that area, because that ratio would be more or less constant. So you could predict how many soldiers or Cuban soldiers were going to be at a base just by looking at how many baseball fields there were. Also at that time, if you remember in history, 1992 to 95 was the Bosnia-Herzegovina conflict in Europe, in Eastern Europe. And a lot of the experience from that was shared with us on how they actually did their photographic interpretation. And one of the big topics there was, I think in that war, there was more than 100,000 people killed. And a lot of it was ethnic cleansing, and there was a lot of mass graves. So what the Royal Air Force used to do is fly missions to go look for these mass graves. And part of that is now understanding the planning that you had to do to get the best possible chance of finding out where these graves are. So the two things they shared with us was, for instance, you would fly an infrared mission about half an hour before sunrise, because the decomposing bodies would then give off a heat signature, and it will make that patch of ground warmer than the area next to it. So that's how they would pick up mass graves. The other one is, if you flew an optical mission with a normal camera, you would fly it literally 2 minutes after sunrise, because the low sun angle, if you've got a heap of ground where there's a grave, would make a shadow next to the grave on the side, but a couple of minutes later that shadow is gone. So if you flew just after sunrise, you would see these long lines of shadow, and that you could then tag those and see, go and investigate there if there's maybe a mass grave or something there, which was also fascinating work that they've done on that. A fascinating discussion we also had as part of the training there was, let's call it imagery anthropology. people's cultures and how people's cultures show themselves on imagery. So for instance, we did a photo study of Hong Kong. And in Hong Kong, the part of the belief system there is this concept of geometry, or the shape of things and the orientation of things. And you can think in a house, feng shui, and how you position things, but the shape of houses and where you put them is also a part of this concept of geometry. So you would see, you look at all the houses on a hill, they all face in the same direction. Because there's a belief system on why they need to face that system. Otherwise, it would be bad luck and so on. And part of this is that a house would have a front door, and opposite it must be a window or another door to let the evil dragon, when it comes to your house, out on the other side. And that actually showed it up in imagery. So if you understood the culture of the people, and in this case, in Hong Kong, geometry, you could start looking for manifestations of geometry on imagery itself. And I remember we did a photo study of some areas in Yemen. And there was a specific one that was quite fascinating. Next to the sea, there are these round circles, well, all circles are round, but there was 9 black circles in the sand in the desert. And we couldn't figure out what this was. And, you know, we now to start thinking a bit laterally. And what it turned out to be was a golf course. Because they don't have grass there, what they do is they flatten a piece of sand and they pour crude oil over it and they set it alight. And when it melts, it goes totally flat. So you've got a black-green for golf. And there were 9 of these. So this is the only way they could play golf. I'm glad I was not a golfer in Yemen. But it was fascinating seeing this on imagery. Another thing also they had in Yemen is that in some of the areas there, outside of the towns, you have a structure, it's a round structure about 2 stories high with arches in it at the top, and it was open at the top. There's no roof. And these were the places where they leave their dead on the roof, on the top. And then vultures from the desert come in and they pick the meat off the bones. So they don't bury the dead. They leave the flesh to be picked by the vultures. And then later, you know, when there's nothing more, somebody come and collect all the bones and they bury that. But that is the culture of the people in that area. And if you don't know those type of things, you would not know what you're looking at on the imagery. It's absolutely fascinating to start thinking, you know, the more you know about, you know, all these subjects, the more the world makes sense to you on imagery. And that is basically what this course helped us to really get right. But I want to tell you about some stories. So this Brazilian fighter pilot, Salu, me and him became great friends because the other officers were now the 3 Muslim guys from Muslim countries, and they tended to almost gravitate to each other, and we hardly ever saw them in the mess, which was really unfortunate. It would have been a great experience to learn more about each other and you know, our respective air forces at a time. And the 2 Belgians, every weekend they got onto the ferry and went back to Belgium to their families to spend the weekend there, which was great for us because the one's wife worked next to a chocolate factory, and he would always bring us each a whole container full of Belgian chocolate every Monday, you know, when they returned from the ferry. So we never complained about that. So it ended up Salu and Michael Gann from Singapore and myself. We were the 3 musketeers that were left over, and we every weekend we went somewhere together. So on the trip to at Lark Hill, we were just returning from Lark Hill, and there's these long motorways. It's like 4 hours to get back to Witten. And our tour guide on this trip was one of the lecturers at JSBI. His name was Graham Sutherland, a very proud Scottish gentleman, you know, proud of his culture and everything else. But Graham had a cassette tape with bagpipe music on it. And whenever we went in the bus, he would put this cassette in and we would listen for now 4 hours, 6 hours at a time at these bagpipes. And at one stage on our way back to Witten, we stopped at one of these little rest stops next to the motorway to just go have a bathroom break and get something to drink. And guys were out of the bus, and I saw Salu hang back a bit, you know, and he said, no, go on. I said, no, what's wrong? Anything wrong? And he says, no, don't worry. So he went into the cassette player, he took the cassette out and he flung it into the bushes. He said, my friend, I have had enough of these bagpipes. I cannot listen to any more bagpipes. So Graham, if you ever see this, sorry for for getting rid of your bagpipes. We really enjoyed it the first 2 hours, but after that it was painful. But this Salou, one of the weekends, the three of us used to get onto the train and go down to London or to other places. But we went to London a few times because there's nothing else to do at Whitton. So we got onto the train, went to London, and we were walking around there, and we did all the touristy things, you know, did the Red Bus tour and Madame Tussauds and all those things. And at one stage, we walking the Saturday morning there in London, and Salou stops dead in his track. He's got his sunglasses on, and he stands there and he looks at a car parked next to the road there. And this car, I later found out, was an East German Trabant. I don't know if we can get an image of it somewhere, but this is like the East German version of the VW People's car. And it was a terrible car. It was the only car available that a citizen could buy after like 15 years on a waiting list. It was just a terrible car. But Salou, look at this car. It's the first time ever he's seen anything like this. And he leaned back and he looked at this car. And Michael and myself were now a bit perplexed. What is he looking at? And he said, Salou, what's wrong? And Salou said, my friend, in my country, Brazil, if you drive a car like this, you will never have sex. It was so funny. Here's Michael and myself rolling with laughter on the street of London. There was Salou so disgusted at this car. The Trabant is really not a great car, but he was very serious about this horrible car. So Salou was an awesome guy, and the three of us spent a lot of time together. And I think he later. He was the reconnaissance lead on his squadron, and he flew the Brazilian equivalent of our Impala. I think it's called the Zavante or something there in Brazil. But he was the reconnaissance lead of the squadron. That's why he came to do the course. He then, about a year after that, I had some contact with him. He left the Air Force and he started flying for Varig, the Brazilian airline at that time. And we kind of lost connection along the way, but he was really an awesome guy to get to know on the course. So at the end of the course, we now finished the course, and we have a bit of a ceremony there with the staff of JSPI. And then I get informed that the guest speaker, or the person who's going to hand over the course certificates, would be the South African military attaché. And at that stage, he was, I've got an image there for you, Chris, Brigadier Tiny Hallows. He was driving through from London to come and do the ceremony and be the guest, the guest of honor at the ceremony. And one of our breaks there that morning, just before the ceremony, I saw the Brigadier Hallows there, and I went to introduce myself to him. And he pulled me aside and said, well done on the course. He says, you're in great company. And he went on to explain, he said that year they had 3 South African officers on courses in the UK. There was one on staff course, and that, I don't know who it was a colonel from one of the squadrons. He came first on their staff course. And we also had a test pilot on the test pilot's course. He came first on that. And then he let the cat out of the bag. He says, oh, and you're first on this course also, congratulations. And I was not supposed to know that by that, but he kind of gave it away. And I was totally surprised by that. So I've got an image there of Brigadier Hallows handing me my certificate there. It was probably a career highlight for me to have that unique opportunity, that learning opportunity, and make great friends there as well. And now I was on my way back to South Africa again. And now I had to, so on my return to Jarek in South Africa, Colonel Milan said, okay, now we should have the second discussion. And he says, the current project officer for the project to upgrade Jarek have just resigned, and he was going on early retirement. He bought a business down in Pietermaritzburg Bay, and we're now looking for a new project officer to take over from him. And I said, oh, I don't know of anyone, but I'll ask around. I said, no, you are the new project officer for Project Pact. And I said, what is Project Pact? He said, well, good thing you ask. And he started to explain to me how this fit into everything else there. But just before I get into the story of Project Pact and what I now did for the next 3 years of my career, on my return to South Africa, I also found out that on an airbase, all officers have to, from time to time, do an overnight duty on the base. So twice or 3 times a year, you had to, from, let's say, about 5 o'clock in the afternoon to 7 o'clock the next morning, look after the entire base and take over the operations of the base, just to make sure that there's a responsible officer to be the single point of control for the base that night. But with me being overseas so much, I didn't get to do any of my duties that year. So on my return, so that would have been early December 1995, I got a Friday night duty, which means I had to be there from 4 o'clock on a Friday to about 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning. And then you take your uniform and everything with you, and you sleep there in the base. They've got a special room there for the officers on duty to sleep there. Part of my duties is the next morning, I saw on the operations board there were a couple of VIPs flying out from Air Force Base Waterkloof that morning. And my task is not to greet them. I just need to make sure that there's a senior officer, a colonel or higher, or a major. I usually, that day it was a colonel, that had to be phoned and make sure that he's on time. And he would actually then receive the VIP and walk that person to the airplane until they take off, salute, and then he can go home again. So that was my job, is just to make sure he's there and on time. And so early that morning, I got up at 6 o'clock, had a shower, got into my uniform, and I had to walk over from the ops room to the VIP movements building. It's a small little brick building there on the eastern side of Air Force Base Waterkloof. And my job was to just make sure the place is clean. The guys there already dressed. Somebody is preparing some onboard snacks for the flight. There's fresh coffee in the percolator, and generally the place is presentable. And then I leave there, and my job is done there. And then the meter and greeter, the senior officer, would then take over from there. So I did all the things I had to do. And there's this long corridor that you have to walk down to the glass doors to now leave to go back to the ops room. And as I was walking down the corridor to the glass door, I saw 5 Series BMW pull in right to the front door of this building. And I realized, oh, this must be one of these VIPs who's now very early. And I just turned around and made my way back down the corridor, and I ducked into the last room on the left-hand side. Because I'm actually not supposed to be there when the VIPs arrive. So now I'm standing there, and I can, just before I turned around, I saw that there were 4 guys that got out of the vehicle, and they all had submachine guns with them. They were obviously the guards for this set of VIPs that just arrived. So I just ducked into the room and waited there with the 2 guys who usually would service, the baggage and stuff there. So I just waited for them in their room there. And I could hear someone come down the corridor. We were just being quiet there in the room, and this person stopped by the door, and I saw the door handle turn and open, and in walked none other than President Nelson Mandela. Okay? And that was the last person I expected to ever meet in my life. So I immediately jumped to attention, and I saluted them, said, "Good morning, Mr. President." And now I'm, what's going on here, because I'm now in the wrong place. And he's in the wrong place. He's not supposed to be there, because that's the room where these 2 guys sleep, actually. Luckily, the place was all neat and so on. And then President Mandela walked straight over to me, and I realized that he already knew these other 2 guys from all these flights and departures from that building. And he came and he put out his hand to shake my hand. And he took my hand, and he wouldn't let go, Chris, for 3 minutes. He held my hand with both hands for 3 minutes. And in that time, he asked me about my family and their health and how are they doing and plans for the weekend. And he commented on the great weather that Saturday morning. And he was telling us about his plans when he get down to Mthatha, with the other people. And then for that 3 minutes of Nelson Mandela's life, he made me feel as the most important person on the planet. And people who's had that experience, would know what I'm talking about. The first thing that really stood out for me is he was very tall. Now I'm tall, and he was taller than I was. I was looking up at him. He was just a statue of a man, and that presence, is electrifying. After a while, I saw that through the window. I saw that the meter and greeter, the colonel, was waiting for him outside. I said, "Mr. President, may I take you to the colonel?" And I escorted him out to the colonel, handed him over to the colonel, saluted him, and I turned around and I left there. But I'll never forget those 3 minutes with President Nelson Mandela. And it's one of those special things that you don't plan for. And then it hit me that he was an hour and a half early for that flight. So when the aircraft left, I waited there and I spoke to the colonel. I said to him, I can't remember who it was. I said to him, the president was an hour and a half early. Usually these VIPs are slightly late, or fashionably late, but he was an hour and a half early. And he said to me, yes, he does this every single time. He says he must realize that the president was in prison for 28 years of his life, and he doesn't want to miss another hour. He's got places to go and people to meet, and he's not going to sit somewhere and wait for another hour and a half. If he can leave an hour and a half earlier, it means that his family and his friends down in Tata see him for an extra hour and a half. So he's always late. He was early, he was never late. And that was just how they knew. So he knew if you phoned him, he must be there early because the president will be early. So all of them knew it. So that was quite a special experience and something. So in 1991, I did my officer's course, and a year later, in 1992, I got my commission as an officer in the Air Force. But with the change in government now, and 94 of the elections and so on, the admin process took a bit to catch up. So finally, in late 95, early 96, I got the certificate, my oath of commission as an officer in the Air Force. And that certificate was signed by President Mandela, and it's one of my prized possessions that I still have here. To have that proud moment to receive my oath of commission with President Mandela's signature on it. It's amazing. Only the state president can give an officer his commission in the Air Force or in the Defense Force. So mine is a very proud piece of paper I still have today. A great story. What I took from that is, for the rest of my life, you need to realize that when you meet new people, you have a choice on how you deal with them and how you handle them. And Nelson Mandela was a great example to us on making anyone, doesn't matter who they are, really feel special, and spend time with them and give them that respect that they deserve as another fellow human being. And just being the president doesn't give you the right to just treat people like rubbish. He was really that example to other people. So that's one of the things I took from that experience with him. But so now I'm back at JARIC. I've now done the International Imagery Interpretation course, and now I was the project officer for Project PACT. Now, just maybe for a bit of context here, in the late 70s, early 80s, the government at the time defined a couple of strategic programs for South Africa. And some of them, not all of them, but some of them would have been the nuclear program. I think that was Project Athena. It would have been the satellite program. And the idea was that South Africa would, if it ever got isolated from the rest of the world, with all the countries above us being communists in the Cold War, we would have a constellation of 16 reconnaissance satellites that would look after our interests in Africa and that region. There was also other, so that was Project Starling, to build the satellites, and that was built mostly in Gauteng in Grabouw, and I'll talk about that a bit later. And also there was things like the fighter replacement program that later became the Cheetahs, that was Project Brahman, and that also included the Israeli Python 4 missiles for the initially the F1s and later for the Cheetahs as well. So that air superiority capability was that Project Brahman, which is the species of what do you call it, cow or beef or whatever animal. So those were some of the major components of the strategic program. Now, in 94, when the new government came to power, they were briefed on Project Starling and the satellite program and everything else. And they were just about in that position where they were ready to launch the first satellites. And I said, okay, now being the new government, you got this big asset that can be a national program of prestige for the country. What do you want to do with it? And the decision was made to not go ahead with launching the satellites, because the thinking was, with South Africa now opening up, all that imagery would become commercially available to South Africa anyway through other means and other countries. So there was at least half a dozen other countries that had high resolution satellite images that you can now commercially go and buy on the open market. So we didn't need that constellation of satellites. And then money would rather and rightfully go to the reconstruction and development program to start building houses for people and help with that upliftment that was so desperately needed at that time. But the decision was made to continue with the upgrade of JARIC, okay, because it doesn't help if you have access to all these satellite images and all these other sources and you can't do anything with it. Your film-based processes would not be able to do anything with that. So Project PACT was taken out of the program and ran as a standalone. And that was my project. I was the 4th project officer on that program to deliver now the upgrade of JARIC. And my predecessors have in the past built a new JARIC building at Air Force Base Waterkloof. And I think it was in January 1990 when JARIC moved from Swartkops Air Station now to Waterkloof Air Force Base. And even to build a new building at Waterkloof was a major problem, because it wasn't common knowledge at the time. But Waterkloof, that whole airbase area, is built on granite, on dolomite. And dolomite is sinkholes. So we had a map there that showed that the base had more than 200 known sinkholes across the base. And there was an instruction from Chief of the Defence Force that no new buildings are to be built on Waterkloof. So they had to get an exemption for that. They had to show that that corner, the northeastern corner of Waterkloof, was geologically stable for JARIC, the new building, to be built there, and they got permission for that. And I think even with that corner of the building closest to the sinkholes started to sag a bit. And at some stage, even when I was there, you could put your hand through the bricks outside because of the sinkholes pulling the corner of the building down. But the building was now a purpose-built, awesome new face brick building for this new JARIC. And now the next phase, and the bit that I would be responsible for, was the actual Unix-based computer system that handled the workflow through the system. So you've got airfilm, satellite, video, infrared, synthetic aperture radar images, all coming through a system, being assimilated into the system, and then you make all sorts of products out of the other side, intelligence reports and maps and digital terrain models, 3D models, all these new world products that we never had access to before. That would be the idea. So for that, how the Defence Force work is that the main procurement entity for a system like that would be Arms Corps. And Arms Corps provided me with a program manager, and that program manager was none other than a certain Frans Verwoerd. The surname may sound familiar. He's the grandson of Hendrik Verwoerd, the father of apartheid at the time. But Frans, if on a spectrum his granddad was here, he was over here. And make no mistake, he was so unlike his grandfather before him. And then the one day I asked Frans, "Did you remember growing up your grandfather?" He said the only thing he remembered was standing next to his grave after he was assassinated in Parliament. He never knew his grandfather anyway. So, but Frans was an electronics engineer, studied at Stellenbosch with an amazing mind. And from Frans, I learned so much in the 3 years we worked together. He had that technical capability, the political astuteness. He had the knowledge of the Arms Corps procurement processes. The Arms Corps followed a specific procurement methodology called the VB2000, and Frans had a lot of experience with that. He knew all the players. He would know the politics on how to get things done at that political level of procurement. So we made a great team, and and every time I learned so much from France, and we worked very closely together, and we also had two people from the main vendor from Altec Defense Systems who are now developing the software for the MIX system, or the Military Imagery Computer System, the interpretation computer system. And so there was 3 or 4 of us. That was the core of this. We also had 2 or 3 operational consultants. There was Bill Buckle, also an ex-Rhodesian, and with a lot of he was a photographic interpreter with great knowledge, around this new world of technology and how we would integrate that and best exploit that for the new JARIC. One of my colleagues and a good friend of mine who later also joined Bill and his team was Arie Gerber. He was Army originally. I think he years back when he did his national service, he was with the South African, the Southwest African Special Forces in the intelligence role there, and he now came up through the Army intelligence ranks and he joined JARIC. And at JARIC, he later converted to Air Force. He saw the light and he came over to the Air Force. And he was then also later one of the operational consultants that worked with Bill Buckle. He also did a lot of his training with in France and in Canada with the different satellite exploitation systems that we used, the software that we used. But there's too many people to mention. There was a core team of about 12 people, and then another 40 around them that were all part of this program to now develop this system. So the first thing that Frans and I had to do was to renegotiate and reset the contract with Altec Defense System, because I think things got to a point where it was a win-lose, where the Air Force had a contract and the contractor couldn't deliver on that at that stage. And Frans realized, he was one of those win-win type of guys, So we need to come up with a plan to get a win-win to now reset this whole program, which he did. And he was awesome at that, to navigate that. We renegotiated that and start the development of that. And also in parallel with that, we realized that there's going to be a major cultural change required on the people who are actually going to use this system. So in parallel with this, we had a team, like a sandbox playpen area. We would put new pieces of technology down for people to play with. And also one of my friends, Minette Liver, she's now in Australia on the Gold Coast. She headed up that area and used to play around with satellites. She did some of the first satellite image processing that we did at JARIC. And then that team started to grow more and more, and more people started to play with the new software and so on, and she would train them up on that. And we also came to a point where we realized we now at critical mass, we had about 10, 12 people that we could send for the proper imagery processing training. And we sent them off to, it was a place in Midrand that did that. But I sat there one afternoon, there was these 12 of us now learning how to process satellite images. I just did an exercise there to process this French spot image, a satellite image. And I sat back and I thought, it was only 7 years ago when I was picking up dog poo at Air Force Base Petersburg. There was no commercial email or internet available. And now we are using software that costs more than my house to process a satellite image made by the French spot satellite in Randburg, and that was going to be the future of JARIC. We've come quite a long way. I remember JARIC, the building itself, had 2 huge rooms. They were probably 8 by 10 meters with big safe doors, and these rooms were the rooms where they were going to keep the big magnetic tapes for the satellite images when they came from Hartbeespoort, because the CSR had this satellite application center out at Hartbeespoort, other side of the Hartbeespoort Dam. And then if you got an image, it was this big roll of magnetic tape, and all these would have been stored there. Well, that was how the planning was done in the 80s. By the time that we now started to deliver the components for the military imagery interpretation computer system, storage devices have shrunk to a size now where all the images that we would ever use would fit into the size of a cabinet optical jukebox the size of a typical family refrigerator, you know. So the rest of the room you use for a table tennis court, you know. It was one of the innovations we had there. But it was fascinating going through this process and to change people and their thinking away from film-based processes now to digital processes. And we had to invest heavily on that side to get people to make that paradigm shift to be able to do that. And that was probably the hardest of all of that, is to affect that change and do that change management around that. But one of the things we did is Armscore had an awesome affiliate called ErgoTech. Now, they did ergonomic engineering, and that is basically man-machine interface. That's the simplest way to explain that. So they worked on things like the Roy Cut and the Roy Falk weapon systems, but for us, we had these hundreds of thousands of rands worth of computer equipment to process now these big satellite images and so on. And each of them, and we had about 12 different configurations, had to have a specific design or layout done by ErgoTech so we could get the most effective use of that workstation for each one of these areas. And probably the most technically complex workstations we had was the assimilation table, or the workstation. And so ErgoTech designed this workstation. Basically, it's a big 2 meter by 1 meter glass table with lights inside. And then the actual film negatives on automated rollers that go on top of this. And it's also a place where you can stick a map down. And basically what you do is, if a negative come in, you say these 4 corners on the negative are these 4 corners on the map. And then you save that to a database. And when you ever query the database in future, you know which negatives you have in your database that would cover that area that you can now make maps with. That's a very simple explanation of a very complex system. But anyway, so ErgoTech, whenever they designed the workstation, they applied the 595 percentile bell curve to the design of the station. So what they would do is, the measurements for South Africans, they would take all of it, put it in a bell curve, and the 5% shortest people they'll leave out of the calculation, and the 5% tallest people they'll leave out of the calculation, and then they'll design it for that middle bit of the bell curve. So those people, so 90% of South Africans would be able to work on that station. Well, they did that. We had 2 guys who work in that area. Armand was below the 5%. He was a very short guy. And Johan was bigger than the 95. He's a very tall guy. He was on the other side. So the 2 guys doing assimilation were either side of the bell curve. So, you know, only 2 people in the country who does assimilation, and neither of them could use the workstation probably. but we made that work. So to actually now build these workstations, Frans also came up with a brilliant idea. In his previous life at Armscore, he was also on the satellite program. And he knew that at HOTEC, you know, because the program was stopped, they had all this very expensive workstation equipment, or like tabletops and partitions and so on at HOTEC still there. And he made some inquiries, and because the place was now dormant, we could actually buy all the equipment or the furniture that we needed for 1/10 of what it would have cost to go out and buy it commercially. But the only catch is that we had to get it to Waterkloof ourselves. So Grabo down in the Cape. So I organized a C-130 and a truck and 8 guys from the SIGIN team. And we went down 1 week on a Monday, and we took 4 of these C-130 pallets with us. And we started breaking down the furniture there at HOTEC. And by the first day, we had 4 pallets loaded and we on the truck, and we took it back to Esterplaat and we flew it up to Waterkloof. And we saved a lot of money that way. But while we were there at HOTEC, before the time, Frans and this lady from Altec Defence Systems, Leonora Fanica, the 3 of us went down to just go look at this furniture would work for our purposes. While we were there, the guys at HOTEC actually showed us the facility there at HOTEC, and they took us into the integration room, the clean room, where they actually assemble and build the satellites. And that was fascinating to see all this equipment where there were already 3 satellites there. The one was just like a demonstrator they would use for shows. There was one where they tested all the new equipment, and there was one being built as the first real satellite. And in this facility, they also had a vacuum a huge vacuum with a 6-meter wide stainless steel door to simulate the conditions of space. Because if you're on a satellite, you use resins and fiberglass and adhesives like that. In the vacuum of space, they actually start to diffuse the gases. They break up into components, and all your glues become brittle and it breaks, and your satellite fall apart. So everything you do that you're going to put on a satellite, you've got to test in this chamber first to make sure that it can stand the conditions of space. And also the satellites, as they go in orbit around Earth, for a couple of hours, they are in darkness, where it's like minus 276 degrees Celsius. And the next minute they break through the sun, and all of a sudden it goes up almost 300 degrees higher where it was before. So that sudden shock on the solar panels and on the equipment, that also had to be simulated and tested there. It was just amazing. It was this clean, dust-free room. We had to wear special overalls to go in there, like you would wear PPE now for COVID. And also the security doors were such a way that it weighed you on the way in and on the way out. And if there was a ½ kilogram difference between the two, the alarm would go off, just to make sure that no one takes stuff in there or takes stuff out of there. It was just this amazing facility there in the middle of the forest, 14 kilometers outside of Grabouw. And I understand it's still operating. They still have that part of Denel now still up and running, and they still provide services to the international space industry, which I'm glad here. But that was quite an experience. So in all of this, we had to learn, because we were now using all these new satellites, we had to learn about orbital mechanics and how these different sensors work on the satellites, so you can get the best out of them and choose the right sensor for the right job. So it was fascinating to have that all new as part of JARIC's capability that we were going to deliver to the Air Force. So finally, at that time, we delivered the whole military imagery computer system. We also delivered a tactical container system that could be flown with a C-130 anywhere and operating with UAVs or drones, because video was a big source of intelligence, was just being developed at that time. We also had the ability to work with wedge film, with digital, and make products there right in that ISO container. So we had that capability. We also, out of my experience with the Royal Air Force and their training facilities, completely redid all the training courses for JARIC. We had 2 full-time training specialists, 2 civilians that just worked on reading all JARIC's courses, and we updated a lot of the training material with some of the concepts and the things that I brought back from the UK. We also redid all the workstations with the stereoscopes and all the equipment that we used to train photographic interpreters at JARIC, off the back of the photographs I brought back from the stations we used at JSPI at RF Witten. So finally, we also had France had this brilliant idea to create one of the first ever, the internet was still very new at that stage, a live link between the Satellite Application Center at Hartbeespoort and JARIC to be able to order online from their catalog of satellite images. So we were one of the first organizations ever to build a web link like that, to have a live database lookup. And I don't know if that's still used. Maybe that's totally replaced by now. It's 30 years later. So I can just imagine what they have today if they still have that capability. But that's one of the things that France came up with that we also delivered as part of that project. So finally, we delivered to JARIC the new capability for the new world to be able to work with satellite imagery. And that also included the logistic support contracts for the whole system, because it doesn't help you've got this capability and you can't support it. So we negotiated that, put that in place, and now JARIC could operate, and be ready for this new world of satellite images. But at that time, in 98, so by 96, I finished, from a career point of view, the military certificate and military management. And immediately, NISA came back to the Air Force and said, anyone who's done this certificate course now getting automatic permission to do the MBL, the Master of Business Leadership program at UNISA, which was a 4-year MBA with a leadership focus. So quite a lot of us took up that opportunity, and I immediately signed up for the MBL. And you know, when you do something like that, your whole world start opening up to the management sciences and how the world out there works. And I was starting to realize that I was slowly but surely outgrowing the Air Force, and the Air Force was changing too in a different direction. But in late 1998, I remember there was an order that came out on Air Force Base Waterkloof that all officers and NCOs had to go do the competency testing for firearms. So all the NCOs, the junior NCOs, had to go shoot R5, and all the officers and senior NCOs had to, on the base, go shoot pistol, and you had to be signed out on the weapon, because that hadn't happened in a couple of years. So you had to book, and you know, on the day you go about 20 at a time and go shoot with the Z88, you shoot at a specific table there on the base, and the base RSM, Sergeant Major Thackeray, he was the person overseeing all of this there. And so we went shooting and so on, but all my time at Single Intelligence, I always carried a Z88 on my deployments, and I also did a few combat shooting courses, so I could use the pistol quite well. So that day we were there on the base shooting this table, and I didn't really give much notice to the other people shooting, but all my rounds were in the bull. It was, you know, at that range we were shooting, it was not that hard, but it was a very tight grouping of shots. So I could really use the Z88 very well. And at some stage when we finished one of the tables, Sergeant Major Thackeray came behind me and he said, "Captain, a word please." And I stepped back to the back of the range, and he said two things. He says, firstly, can you please stop making some of the NCOs look bad? You know, you're shooting too well. Please, officers are not allowed to shoot that well. You know, please stop doing that. He said, and the second thing is, he says, in my experience as a RSM in the Air Force, I know that officers who can shoot well like this make great parade commanders. So he said, I just found my next parade commander for the next 3 parades coming up on the base, and they were just planned for the end of that year. So inadvertently, you know, I got selected by the RSM to do these 3 parades. The first one was a medal parade. So on that one, I actually received my 10-year service medal, as well as my MMM decoration, which I did not even know I was being signed up for. And that was between now General Yanni Malan and Colonel Derek Taylor, who is now the officer commanding of JARIC. They actually did the write-up and the citation for me for the decoration, which is rare for a captain to get. It's usually your senior officers who get an MMM or any other decoration. So it was really a surprise to me when that was announced. So I got 2 medals in 1 parade there. The second parade was actually a guard of honor for South Africa was now opening up. And one of the visitors we had in that time the next week was the chief of the French Defense Force. He was actually a Navy admiral at the time. So I was the officer in charge of the guard of honor for him. So when he arrived at Air Force Base Waterkloof, I was there doing the parade. And he also had a comment about, he saw my name, you know, when I was introduced, Jacques du Toit, French name and surname. And he started speaking French to me, and I had no idea what he said. He could have said, "Hey, your fly is open," or whatever. I wouldn't know. But I just nodded and saluted him, and he was off again. And, you know, that was that. It was quite an honor to do that. And then the third parade was actually the trooping of the colors parade for JARIC. Now that JARIC was now upgraded, that was a great honor to now be the parade commander for JARIC's colors parade. And that was the last parade I also did before you know, I left in the next year. I started to realize that, you know, if I wanted to start a family and you know, pursue my own other ambitions, the Air Force was changing a lot at that time, and I thought I had done my bit, and it was now time to move on. So, you know, I was halfway through my MBL, One of my other friends who also previously worked at Jarek, Leon Gansbeek, he had now joined one of the big four consulting firms in South Africa. And, one day he said to me, we're really looking for guys like you who've got project management experience. We're growing our business, and it would be, I'd like to introduce you to some of the guys at the firm. And, that was a quick, half an hour interview, and I had a job. And I left the Air Force in early 99. And, that was the Thursday. The next Monday, I walked into this consulting firm, and I started to run the Y2K project in 99 for one of the biggest stockbrokers in Johannesburg. And my salary tripled overnight just by leaving the Air Force at that time. So I had this awesome career as an officer in the Air Force, did all these wonderful things, and now I was ready for the next phase of my life. So I hope you found that interesting as a bit of a different type of a career. We don't usually get, to do all these things, but, I would always treasure the time in the Air Force and the people I worked with. The people made the difference. We had the most amazing people. And I apologize if somebody ever watches this and you didn't mention me or so. There were just too many people. At that stage, the Air Force alone was 10,000 people. And I worked with more than 1,000 in my time. So I only mentioned a few people, but behind them were probably 10 times more people that were part of these stories. So I apologize if anyone feel offended of not being mentioned in my 11 years career over the 4 episodes, but, very proud of my time there, and really, I was now looking forward to the next phase of my career. And that's basically my 11 years in the Air Force.
Well, I must tell you, I'm fascinated. I'm sitting here, and you people watching here can't see that, but Jacques can see me perfectly on his screen, and I'm nodding. And sometimes, and not so much, but I have some small muscles here because it's just fascinating. And if there's anyone who feel left out here, come and talk to us. Come and tell your story. I'm not going to say you were important, you know that. But Jacques, this to me opened the entire world. I've got a new respect for the Air Force right now. When you left the flight crew, did you get a reduction in pay when you changed your career? Did that affect you financially, that decision?
No, not at all. I don't think we really got a flying allowance that I remember. You just reminded me, parallel to this, I had to maintain my flying status. So every year on my birthday, I still had to go do my flight medicals. In Centurion, near the Unitas Hospital, is the Institute for Aviation Medicine. So if you any air crew anywhere in the Air Force, you've got to go there on your birthday and go do your flight medical. So I still maintain that, and I think I had my last flight on the Boeing 707 year in the middle of 1997, and it was quite a special flight because I think that's the one we did with the Boeing around Madagascar, and it was quite a long one. So at the time I was with Signal Intelligence itself, our director of Signal Intelligence was a Colonel Koos Botha. He was a navigator. Now, in that time, when I now moved careers over to the Imagery Intelligence side, he went to some staff role at Air Force headquarters, and he was replaced by someone else at the time. But at some stage, he had an audit done of his flying logbooks, and he realized that he was 10 hours short of his 1,500 hours as a navigator in the Air Force, so he could get his gold wing. So he just needed 10 hours. So what they did is on this flight around Madagascar, the Boeing in 1997, they arranged that he would be the second navigator on the flight. And that sortie would be just longer than 10 hours anyway on a normal day. So he flew with us as the second navigator, and he got his gold wing on that flight, which was very special for all of us because you had all these senior officers in the Air Force with their gold wings, and that meant something. It meant that these people made a career and a life out of flying in the Air Force. And I was, very fortunate to be on that flight with Colonel Koos Botha. I think he later became a general as well, after he did staff course. So that was very special. But 97, that year, just over a year before I left the Air Force. Was the last flight I did. So still had to maintain the flight status, but after that, I basically was full-time. Every hour of my day went into Project Pact, so there was no more time for flying. And also the new generation of operators were coming off the courses, and there was enough operators. And with the DC-4 being withdrawn, they now the Turbo Dakota, the new C-47s, they were upgraded with the turboprops and painted light blue. They were coming online with the new. They would be the next generation of Spook aircraft. So I never flew on them. But there was a next generation of 2 or 3 courses after me that now provided all the operators for that. So there was no need for me to fly. My attention and my expertise was now needed elsewhere, and that was with the upgrade of Charic.
There's a common misunderstanding, and I might be wrong, but I believe the South African Air Force is the second oldest Commonwealth Air Force, not the second oldest Air Force. As far as I know, is that true?
The Air Force, South African Air Force, is the second oldest Air Force after the Royal Air Force. Now, if you look at Air Force Base or Air Force Station Swartkops now, and the northern end of the runway there, you'll see there's some smaller aircraft hangars there. Now, those hangars, plus some of the initial aircraft, I don't even know what they were called, they were biplanes, was part of what was referred to in the late 1910s, just after the Second World War, as the Imperial Gift from the UK. And that's where the South African Air Force started off a couple of years after the Royal Air Force. And that Imperial Gift was the first set of planes. They still had the linen over the biplane wings and so on. So it's officially the second oldest Air Force in the world.
So when you went to the RAF, did you feel like you're coming home, or did you feel welcome there? Were they interested in what you guys were doing for the last, I suppose in 76 when the sanctions came?
It is interesting. Even with all these air forces there together, and especially the people from the Royal Air Force, there's almost like a professional courtesy and a mutual respect for each other. So you never felt like people were looking down at you, or you were second-rate Air Force and so on. Everyone was treated with the highest level of respect. There was, however, one small exception. One of our lecturers on the course was an American Air Force intelligence officer, quite a young guy. He was doing a 1-year tour there at JSPI. And this guy, unfortunately, he realized that everyone in the room there, maybe except the Belgians, are from third world countries, all these places like Indonesia and Brazil and South Africa, they must be backwards. So whenever he spoke to us, he spoke very loud and slowly and nodded his head a lot like we were stupid, So he was very condescending in his mannerism, and we made it very clear to the staff of the college that, this guy is really polarizing us there for the wrong reasons, and it was detracting from our learning. So they replaced him at some stage. Someone else took over his course, but he had this air of superiority that he thought, he's American Air Force, he knows everything, and we know nothing, we idiots. And people were really visibly offended by this, but he was the exception. The rest of the people would always make sure that everyone contributed, and they would respect their views and their contribution to discussions and so on. And people would be very interested. They would say, okay, so what is happening with the Air Force? What is it like to be in a South African Air Force? We're very interested, especially in South Africa and how things were happening with all the changes at that time. So they only had the greatest respect for the history of the South African Air Force, and they were always very interested in what we were doing in South Africa.
Well, it's an interesting thing. I'm glad you mentioned that, because if I remember correctly, there was a few exercises in the 1990s and up to 2000 between the South African Air Force and the Yanks. And they arrived with the F-15 Strike Eagles, and they went up against the Cheetahs, and guess what? They were shot down. They lost the engagements. And so did the Belgians. They arrived there with the F-16Bs, And they also lost, and they complained a lot, and perhaps they woke up to reality now. I want to ask you an unfair question, Jacques. It is so that a lot of innocent people are currently being killed by drone strikes and other aircraft strikes. Whether Americans once again are involved, leading the effort to kill the innocent, if you ask me. And some companies, some human rights organizations say that they miss the intended target 96.5% of the time. And just this week, it came out with a New York Times report that they killed something like 60 to 80 innocents in Iraq. A month or two ago, they killed an entire family, in Afghanistan. And they lied about it twice. That's why I have so much contempt, because anybody can make a mistake. But when you make a mistake, you man up and you say so and you do the right thing. And before that, they even bombed French hospital of Medicines Without Borders. That was also in Afghanistan. You spoke about this warrior, I believe, vehicle which were bombed during the first Gulf War and killed a whole bunch of people. As a professional man, would you like to say to me, or guess an opinion on what the hell went wrong? How does these things happen? It seems to me all the time.
That's an interesting question, because I'm not sure if I'm the best person to answer that, but I've got personally a very strong learning style, so I like to go read up on things and find out a bit more. And especially my understanding from reading the report of that first attack, the one at Ludgershall, just because I saw results of what those two warrior vehicles looked like there next to the shed. My understanding from that is that there was a whole breakdown in the command and control that led to that accident, where all these British soldiers lost their lives. And it was things like these two aircraft were 20 miles off their target area to start with. Secondly, the Board of Inquiry showed that both vehicles correctly and consistently displayed the inverted V that was the Allied Forces recognition symbol on the vehicles. Plus, they had day glow panels on top of the vehicles, and the Iraqis didn't do that. So those two things combined, if you took the minute to just do that properly, they would have realized. But they were using the Maverick as a standoff weapon, and they may not have had visual confirmation of those two things. So many things went wrong there, and as you can't believe it, but in the second Gulf War, exactly the same thing happened again. They also, this time with also A-10s, but this time with the guns, the 30mm guns, they also shot out two warriors. This time the warrior stopped and the commander got out just to orientate him on the map. And while he was standing on the dune next to the vehicles, these two airplanes rolled in and destroyed the two vehicles. And the second almost copycat accident, blue on blue accident, happened again. So I can't comment on in general that type of behavior, but there are rules of engagement. There's international law that govern these things. There's officers are taught in their training to be responsible for their actions like that. You can be court-martialed if you don't follow your procedures and process in your training. So a lot of things had to go wrong for them to get into that situation. But blue on blue casualties is a fact of life. It happens all the time. It happened in a border war a couple of times. If you go read and listen to some of these stories. So, it really comes down to that command and control, the governance around your operation, the training of the people, and making sure that your processes worked to prevent people from dying for stupid reasons like that. So, and also we live in a world now where there's information war on the go. You don't know what to believe, what you see on TV anymore. You don't know what is there created to be real or false. It's it's a whole new ball game that luckily wasn't there when I was in the Air Force. But with technology and the internet as it is now, I can just imagine the initiatives that goes on behind the scenes to influence normal people like you and me looking at those events and form an opinion off the back of that to determine whether we're going to support something politically or not. Luckily, I'm not in that position where I've got to make those decisions.
It's fascinating to me. In Africa, about 20 years ago, we started seeing mosques suddenly arising in countries which were mostly Roman Catholic. And we couldn't really figure it out if there's a revival or something going on. Then we realized when you look at the mosque in the way it's built, you know whose money is behind it. You can definitely see from the structure that it's Saudi money 99.9% of the time. So it would be of a Sunni group, not of a Shia. So it's not Iran, it's actually Saudi. And we started seeing these mosques, which is fascinating in counterterrorism because we had to start wondering what's happening. So when you were talking about looking at an image and you can make certain deductions, I have to say I found that fascinating beyond belief. Do you still have those skills, Jacques?
Unfortunately, I do. So, every now and then I love to just go onto Google Earth and go look on areas. It's fascinating what you have access to now. I wish we had these type of tools way back when I was in the Air Force. But, for instance, if you ever want to look at an image on Google Earth, so what you do is you choose the area of interest, like a town where you grew up or a foreign country or whatever, it doesn't matter. The first thing that you do is you turn the image around so that the shadows fall towards you. Okay, that's very important. It doesn't matter what the compass direction is, but the shadows are going to fall towards you, and your mind recognize images and shapes better if the shadow is coming towards you and not away from you. That's the first thing that's going to help you. The second thing you want to do is that you now want to get an idea of scale. So you want to look at things that are familiar to your eye that you can use a scale to compare things to. So if you look at I mentioned before, sports fields are a great aid in this. If you look at a place where there's these standard ISO containers, shipping containers is a great standard length. So you get 3 different shapes or sizes. And if you know there's a big one or a medium one, you can size everything else after that. But then you start looking around that and you try to ask yourself, you first stand back and you ask yourself, okay, so what is the culture of the people I'm looking at? Are there a lot of golf courses or places of worship? Or how does the road network work? Where do they get the electricity from? You start asking yourself that question. You start following electrical lines and so on. And it's amazing the things you can learn about an area just like that. But there was this very interesting story that we heard at the time of one of the space shuttle missions that got debriefed when they landed. And one of the astronauts on the space shuttle told a story that when they were going over the Sahara, he actually saw 2 white Land Rovers drive in the Sahara. And he could see the 2 white vehicles with the dust behind them. They were going from this one place to another place. And when the people who were doing this debrief analyzed that it was technically impossible for him to recognize these 2 vehicles as Land Rovers. But he was correct. They confirmed it was that day, that time, there were 2 white Land Rovers. But it was technically, from a resolution point of view, at that altitude, impossible to determine that. So when they investigated this a bit further, what they found is that this astronaut's brother-in-law worked for a part of the United Nations, and they did a weekly visit to that area. And he knew that at that time they would be there, and it would be the 2 Land Rovers. So he had that additional knowledge that, firstly, Land Rovers are being used, and this is the schedule and so on. And that additional information helped him to put 2 and 2 together to come up with this answer that it did not have before. And the same model of if you know what you're looking at, if you know electricity or harbors or military bases or airfields, if you know how they're normally structured, you can use that as a pattern in your mind to look at it and say, okay, if this is there, this must be there, where you can start looking for things like that. And there are fascinating places. There's a lot of places that I look on the internet and I got no idea what's going on there. You know, I can't tell you. It's just this something I've never seen before in my life, which makes it very interesting to do like that. But you know, often if I hear a story over the news and they mention a place and so on, I try to go and find that place on Google Earth with the same perspective and so on, just to orientate myself towards it and see if I can do that. So that's just a personal interest on the sideline. But doing a course like that, you know, imagery intelligence is said to be the most comprehensive source of intelligence. So if you look at a detailed photo interpretation report of a place, a base or an area or whatever, it's the most comprehensive source from all the other sources that you would get in the intelligence world. Okay, so a trained photographic interpreter looks at the world different. You can't but drive around and look at power lines differently. And you look at a railway line catenary, these structures that is over a railway line is called catenary. You look at that totally different. If you drive past the harbour, if I go down to Wellington to the harbour, you know, you see ships there, just by looking at a ship, you can immediately see if it's half full, empty, totally full. You can see, you can tell a lot about the ship, what it does, what's on that ship. You can, just by the knowledge you have of ships. You know, so you look at the world completely different. It's almost a curse sometimes, you know, you see something that you don't understand and you need to go and investigate what it is. I had a case here in Wellington Harbour. There was a very strange catamaran vessel in the harbour a couple of years ago. And I couldn't figure out from what I saw what this vessel did. So I started looking at catamaran vessels and so on, and I found it. The catamaran gives a special stable platform for support for oil rigs. So there's a couple of oil rigs here off the west coast of New Zealand on the North Island. And these ships actually go and support, they take cargo and people to the oil rigs. And the catamaran design makes them very stable. So, you know, I could find them. So I don't think you ever lose it. You know, if I drive around and see an antenna, I know exactly what the antenna is used for. It's just built into you. Although I haven't been in the Air Force for nearly 30 years, I've moved on from that. You still have that patterning and that thinking in you to identify things like that. It's actually fascinating.
It's fascinating talking to you. I'll tell one quick short story and then we'll ask you what you're doing now. And also, I know you're a cancer survivor. I'm sure you would want to know about that. But last week, we were transferring 2 computers between the 2 schools, which my wife owns. And these were old computers, one of them, and it's quite heavy. So we parked, not totally illegally, but we parked on the pavement. There's space to do that. And as we came back, here is Switzerland's finest, or let me rather say Canton Wards Police. Now we're standing there. Now, as you look at the images, of course, I look at the policemen and people in a different eye. I see a lot of things, I suppose, that other people don't do. But the guy wants to write the ticket, and my wife is quite good at persuading people not to do such things, so she's chatting away in French. I only catch a word here and there. So I'm standing like this, and I'm looking at the guy, and I thought to myself, wow, you are totally unaware. I'm standing here right behind you. I would never have allowed anybody to approach me like that. But anyway, so he's not aware. And we talked further to him, and after a while he decided, no, he'll rather give us just a warning. And, you know, we were suitably, je suis regret, je suis désolé, very sorry, blah, blah, blah. Not really, but you play the game. But now I'm getting interested in this fellow, you know, from a professional viewpoint. And I'm asking through my wife, what firearm are you wearing? Now I know it's a Glock 17, I've recognized it. Would you believe he couldn't answer me? He could not answer any questions on what firearm he's wearing. He could not tell me how many bullets he has. He couldn't do the most basic things. And yes, people can say to me, you know what, perhaps he didn't want to tell you. No, he was plain confused. You can see it. The guy's eyes, you know, looked to the left up like that. He was totally out of it. He just didn't know what was happening. So I think this skill stays with you for your life. And I think you can't take the Air Force out of you or you can't take the police out of you or the army, and so you have to learn to live with it. As you say now, and this is the same with us. I spoke to a bunch of 3 battalion guys the other day, and we agreed we can't really see the veld anymore as something beautiful. We see ambush sites, we see all sorts of things. I think I believe I've sat in church even, and then I would say to myself, okay, I want to blow this place up, or if I have to conduct some kind of a rescue here, this is how I will do it. You know, of course, the Domini was very boring, otherwise I wouldn't be saying that. But let's talk about you. Jacques, what happened after the Air Force years? What are you doing now? If you wish, tell us about your cancer survival. We're fascinated. We want to hear.
Chris, so when I left the Air Force, I joined this professional services consulting firm in Johannesburg and completed my Masters of Business Leadership. And I started to do large projects and programs for this firm. But you grow all the time, you learn all the time. And I also did a lot of work in stockbroking and a big re-engineering process. South Africa was at that stage going from paper-based settlements to electronic settlements, and Merrill Lynch, the firm I worked for, had the biggest settlements office in South Africa. So I spent 2 years of my life there helping them with that re-engineering role. And then the guys at the consulting firm heard I was back in the market, and they said, "Oh, when can he start?" So I was there for a total of 11 years again. And also, you know, one of the things that from my Air Force career, I always went where I was needed. Okay, so when I did my national service, for instance, with the dogs, by the time the groups before us started clearing out, I realized that there was no more kennel master. So I took up the role as kennel master. I didn't ask for permission. I just took it up, and you know, I was needed there, and then somebody had to do that. So I started to work with the vets and order the food and make sure that the whole kennel was properly run, and did the dog shows that we used to run there. And then when this opportunity came up at Jarek to change from signal intelligence to imagery, you know, I was needed elsewhere, and I changed there as well. But within my consulting life as well, going from client-facing delivery work to the need was now to be a specialist in business development in professional services. So I pivoted my career to that, and the last 7 years of my consulting career, I just did business development. Yeah, in the what was it? About 14 years ago. So this month is I've been in New Zealand for 14 years. I realized that you know, there was a great opportunity, career opportunity, to come out to New Zealand. My daughter was about 10 years old at the time, and we decided it's the best thing for her to have a future where, you know, she can be anything she wants. And then she just last week wrote the last exam, and she will in December graduate as a mechanical engineer. Very proud of her. You know, and she had so many opportunities, and she would never have got to this place if we sat in South Africa. So it's basically for her and her future that we immigrated to New Zealand. So I've been in professional services consulting for the last 24 plus years. You know, I'm currently an independent contractor, project and program management, business development, bit of leadership and strategy consulting. Operating here in Wellington. Wellington is like the Pretoria of South Africa. All the government departments and ministries are here in Wellington. There's a lot of South Africans here, especially in IT. Probably 60% of the people here work in some IT role here in Wellington. The South African IT skills are highly regarded in New Zealand in general. And in the 14 years, you know, we got our citizenship 7 years ago. And I could just see how the South Africans were coming over. And there's a lot of South Africans here in New Zealand. You know, on a personal note, about 3.5 years ago, routine checkup, they found that I had bowel cancer, and in 30 seconds, your whole life changes. So we went through bowel cancer, you know, all the chemo and radiation and big operations and stuff. And then this year in April, you know, still on the routine checkup route. I had a routine checkup, and they found liver cancer. So when bowel cancer apparently goes away, it comes back as liver cancer. So I had a big liver resection where they cut out 70% of my liver in May this year. So I grew back a new liver in 6 weeks' time. So now I've got a brand new liver. I'm cancer-free. I go for my checkups every 3 months. And I learned so much from this process. You are responsible for your own health. No doctor or no GP is going to do that for you. You got to know a lot about your body and about cancer specifically. No family history at all, and all of a sudden you get the surprise. Twice had to fight cancer and twice been through that. And I think a lot of that resilience came from just being a South African in general, but also having had a military career that really helped me to get through all of that. And also great support system around me. You can't do this alone. You need people around you to help you to handle these things, and you need to allow them to do that. So I'm very fortunate to sit here, very healthy, cancer-free, and just living life. So so for me at the moment, I've decided to take a bit of a career break right now, just to take a break from everything that's been happening with COVID in the world the last 2 years. New Zealand has been very fortunate. I think it's been well managed here for the most. Can always be critical about some of the aspects, but we've been very fortunate. We've got a very low death rate, and our economy is more or less intact through all of this. So we're in a very fortunate position. And I'm looking forward to progressing just my career as a professional services consulting. And what I've also been doing, Chris, is that immigration is not for sissies. It's very hard, and people don't tell you that before you immigrate. And unless you've been through an immigration process, you won't know what I'm talking about. But I decided if I can help anyone ever to understand the process, I can't give immigration advice. I'm not allowed to do that, but I can help people to connect them to my network, because in New Zealand, you've got to know someone first to get work. You don't send your CV and they get work. You've got to have a personal relationship first. So I have helped in the last, especially 4 years, more than 100 people to connect them to my network to get work. I've helped whole families to come over because of that, where the dad or the mum gets work and then they bring all their children with. I also do this thing where, at no charge to anyone, I take people on a 8-hour tour of the Greater Wellington area, just to get in to build up a bit of an affinity for the place and understand the history of Wellington and everything around them, to just assimilate a bit better. So next time when you drive around areas, you know a bit more about the place that you now call home. So I've done that for more than 60 people now. My time, I love doing that. I'm very proud of the place where I live, and, to show people around and just share that with them. And they really appreciate that, they're just that investment. So I take them to fascinating places. Here in Wellington, we have a suburb called Miramar. It's near the airport. And that's where, just in a normal street, there's a couple of warehouses and sheds. And that's where they've made Titanic, Avatar, King Kong, Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit. All those movies have been made just in one street there in Miramar. I take them to places like that. And there's also, on my tour, one of the last places I take them to is the place where the haka was invented, where the haka was done the first time. And I go show people where and why and tell them that story of where the haka comes from. We also have a beach here in Wellington in the city with white sand. Now, Wellington doesn't have white sand. So there's a family trust that was established more than 100 years ago that bring white sand by barge from the South Island, so that the Wellington city could have a white sand beach. And every year, twice a year, they fill up this beach with white sand, so the children have a white sand to come and play on and swim from. There's small little things like that that build into a tour, just to share with people and help them to make this place their own. And I really love helping people that way. So if anyone ever needs help, if they, can't give immigration advice, and I'll never do that. But if you want to understand how to navigate this place, and if anyone is ever interested to immigrate here, please contact me via LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. I've got quite a big network there, so always willing to help. So just contact me there.
Well, we'll definitely put your links here right now where we spoke, and we will also put it in the description. And then once again, it's for people to actually do something. You know, a lot of things in life doesn't come to you. You have to go and grab. But now I'm going to ask you the most unfair question. You being now a Kiwi and all. So what rugby team do you support? If these two nations get to each other, the Springboks against the All Blacks, where do you stand?
Oh, that is a good question. You know, for the most, when I took on New Zealand citizenship, I decided, you know, that I need to support my local team. So the local team here is the Hurricanes. So I support them. They're a great team. On average, they're usually in the top 3 or 4. They've got some really good players and a lot of All Blacks also in the team. But I've also decided to, you know, in New Zealand, things are set up in such a way that almost everyone knows almost all the All Blacks by name. You know, so I can now name 10 All Blacks just like this, but I have to really think if I want to name one Springbok player. You know, South Africa will always have a special place in my heart, and I'll always, you know, support the Springboks against everyone else they play. But you got to be loyal to someone. So when they play, you know, I'd rather go do something else because it's a hard one. But by default, I support the All Blacks. However, that unpopular statement that maybe I do support the All Blacks. They're awesome. They're really great. You know, they're genuine people. They really got a great skill. New Zealand has got a very strong rugby culture, and wherever you go, you can see that. You know, almost, you know, half the advertisements on TV is got All Black supporting something or saying something. So, you know, it's awesome to see this. Wellington also, New Zealand rugby. It's just right here in the city, so you often see these All Blacks walking on the street, and that's also something nice about Wellington is that I had a coffee catch up with some friends in the city this afternoon, and sitting in this coffee shop, one of the members of Parliament and one of the ministers walked in, and they're like normal people, yeah, you know, and people don't even look up or, you know, they just let them be and go around. So I've often seen the Prime Minister walk around town. And there's maybe one of her guards behind her, following her, and so on, but very discreet. You know, there's no blue light brigades and things like that. Yeah, it's, people just, you know, treat people, especially politicians like that, as if they are normal people. So that also is very special.
Yeah, we come to an end now. We came to an end. I'm not sure. 4 episodes. I do believe there might be a 5th. I think people are going to ask a lot of questions. Should they ask so many questions, would you be willing to come back and also, you know, perhaps tell us more about New Zealand, your new home?
Yep, sure. You know, let's see what if there's any questions or reactions coming through. You know, I'd love to share that. You know, so let's see what comes out.
Then I wish to say to anybody listening here, like I always say by now, come and talk to us. You know, there was a time in South Africa when you got back from a border or you were in the service of a government, army, police, air force, whatever, and people sort of treated you not with the respect which I think you were due. And I think people know exactly what you mean, or what I mean. You know, it's almost as the most stupid son will join the police, you know, and things like that. Harsh comments were made, unnecessary. The time is now to speak up. If you have a story, if you feel that you can bring light to us like Jacques did here for hours and hours, we are most grateful. We want to hear it. So Jacques, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for your service. Thank you for spending the time here with us. It is nighttime that side. The first episode, we went on almost till 2 o'clock in the morning. Thank you for that. We appreciate. And until we meet again, God bless.
Thank you, Chris.